Chapter 11. Farewells. As the days went on, the queen would feel the king's hand in hers as she slept. She sometimes heard his steps upon the stairs, or his rapping at her chamber door. Occasionally, she heard a laugh that she thought belonged to him. In these moments, she told herself that it had all been a terrible mistake, and that he was home, alive, with her. But those moments quickly faded as the hazy cloud of despair dissipated and reality forced itself upon her. She would make promises to the gods, vowing to be a better wife if she could have her husband back. She felt wicked for shaming him at the winter solstice festival. She wanted to tell him how much she loved him. He had to have known. She couldn't stand the thought of him not knowing. When the time came, she could not look upon his body. Instead, she asked Verona to do the deed for her, and she put off making the funerary arrangements for as long as she could. Days, or had it been weeks, had passed since his death, and the queen was bombarded with requests for details about the funeral. They seemed to come by the quarter hour from all the lands, piles of them brought in on silver trays by women with swollen eyes, the entire household grieving, the castle haunted by attendants wearing black armbands, puffy white faces, and quiet dispositions. Everyone tiptoed around the queen as if she might break at any moment. Perhaps some of them wondered how she hadn't done so already. And all this time, the slave in the mirror did not show his face. Strangely, she had begun to desire his presence. If he could see all in the kingdom, then why not beyond it? And beyond that, to the great unknown. But now that she longed for his image to appear, he was nowhere to be seen. Her longing, her agony, was so great, but only Verona saw her cry. The queen would lock herself in the morning room, looking out past the garden toward the courtyard and the well, just looking at the flowers stirring in the breeze, remembering her wedding day. A servant would bring a plate of sandwiches and tea, removing the untouched dishes only a short time later. Sometimes she would think she saw the king walking his customary path back to her. She would imagine herself running up to greet him, kissing his face as he lifted her into the air like a little girl. The piles of letters that continued to accumulate sat unopened in front of her. My poor girl. An older woman with bright silver hair pulled into two large buns on either side of her head was standing on the threshold of the morning room. Her hair glistened in the sunlight. Her eyes twinkled with tears and kindness. Who was this woman? An angel coming to claim the queen? Then an unfamiliar face stepped up behind the woman. Uncle Marcus. The woman must have been Aunt Vivian. The queen stood to greet them, and Marcus pulled her close and embraced her. He felt warm and real. She felt safe and protected in his arms. Her heart threatened to break under the weight of his kindness. Hello, Uncle. I'm so glad to see you, she said flatly, as if she could hardly believe she'd ever feel anything close to happiness ever again. We're here now, dear. Me and your Aunt Viv. We're here to help you. You name it, dear, and I will do it, said Vivian. Anything, my dear. If there is anything I can do, please let me know. I've been where you are, dear, sick for months. Couldn't get out of bed. Oh, I know all the tricks. We'll have you back up and running as soon as possible. You mark my word, darling. The queen nodded absently. Why don't I start by opening these letters for you? No sense in you having to go through these now. No sense at all. I'll take them all if you don't mind. The queen suddenly felt embarrassed. I'm sorry, I didn't ring for refreshments, or have someone show you to your rooms, she said, her eyes glassy with grief. That's all been taken care of, dear. Verona saw to it. Don't you worry about us, dear. We're here to help you. Now, what can I get you? Perhaps some hot tea? That pot looks cold, and I think we should get some food in you. You look as if you've not eaten properly in weeks, Aunt Viv said. The queen shook her head. Don't bother going against her, Majesty, Marcus said. She will have you stuffed before you can say no. Aquesus, I learned a long time ago it is much easier, and tastier too. Marcus patted his paunchy belly. The queen smiled for the first time since she'd lost her husband. It was a weak, almost forced smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was nice to have someone older to count upon, someone who had been so close to her husband. With Aunt Viv's help, funeral arrangements were finally made. The king's body was taken to the mausoleum on a rainy morning. It was carried in an ornate horse-drawn carriage that had brought the king's father and all his father's forebears before him to their graves. Ahead of the carriage were two large, shiny black horses, who seemed to be mourning the king's loss along the rest of the kingdom. Inside the carriage, the king's coffin was covered with flowers, red roses, the queen's favorite. He had requested it in the papers he had left before his first campaign away from her. The queen wore a black dress with deep red beading. Her hair was pulled into a lavish braid and coiled upon her head. She was shielded from the rain by servants who held a thick black cloth over her head. Snow, the broken child, was outfitted in a dress of the deepest red. The queen wondered if the girl would ever be happy again, and if so, would she have the right to be? The queen, who had not appeared publicly since the king's death, stood with Verona's help. As the body was stowed away in the mausoleum, Verona pulled her arm around her queen, her friend, and led her and Snow back to the carriage, to be transported back to the castle. "'Tis a pity. Such a shame, really. So young, so beautiful he was, and now gone." The queen looked up. The sisters. "We needed to be here," Lucinda said. "We hope you don't mind," Martha continued. "After all, we parted on such sour terms last visit," Ruby finished. The queen was too exhausted from grief to feel anything but apathy towards the sisters. Now was not the time to become incensed. "Thank you," the queen replied. "We assume," Lucinda continued. "You have received our gift?" Martha finished. The queen nodded absently, not even truly processing which gift they were speaking of, not thinking about the mirror at all. "He can be a bit cold-hearted and brutish, that father of yours," Ruby said. "Please do let us know if he needs taming." Verona glared at the sisters, standing there, soaked from the rain. She was tired of their cryptic talk and riddles. She jerked the queen and her daughter closer to her side, ushering them away from the sisters and into their carriage. The sisters took quick, short, bird-like steps away from the funeral, and the queen wasn't sure if it was her grief playing tricks on her or if she really did hear laughing coming from the sisters as they went away.